Ladies and gentlemen, hi. My name is Andrew Johnstone. I'm speaking to you from Cape Town. Welcome to SAVCA and welcome specifically to this panel. I'm representing Climate Fund Managers, which is a climate investment business targeting the emerging markets of Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa. What we do is use a technology called blended finance, and this entails raising capital from governments, development finance institutions, and the commercial sector, blending it together such that it can be deployed appropriately into those areas most affected by climate change. We currently have two initiatives underway: Climate Investor 1, targeting renewable energy, and Climate Investor 2, focused on water and oceans. To date, we've been associated with 30-odd developments and developers, of which 6 have now transitioned into construction stage, and these involve large-scale wind farms in Vietnam, in Djibouti. We have solar rooftop businesses in Thailand, Malaysia, India, and we're doing hydro in Uganda. As the challenges of climate change, post-COVID recovery, energy transition, and the broader aspirations of SDGs become more and more urgent and more immediate, so the use of blended finance and its deployment becomes more integrated and more relevant to what we're trying to do. Our byword is do more, faster. So when you think about climate fund managers, think about climate, think about blended finance, think about impact, and think about sustainable economies and societies. I hope you found this discussion on this panel enlightening, and enjoy your day further.
Good morning, SAVCA delegates and attendees. Before I start, I'd like to thank Tanya and her team for allowing us to present a study on an industry that is topical across the continent and indeed across the world. The case for investing in cannabis evolved in what seems like the blink of an eye. In less than 15 years, this illegal narcotic banned across most markets is now widely accepted as a form of treatment for rare forms of childhood epilepsy and long-term pain management. It is also starting to penetrate other market segments such as pet care, cosmetics, and nutraceuticals. What we saw in the government of Lesotho and MG Health, our portfolio company in the sector, was a government with the foresight to regulate and to allow fully integrated production licenses, where companies could go from development and growth from seed through to mature plants all the way to medicinal quality products. What we saw, an environment that is naturally conducive to the successful propagation of the plant, high quality, pristine mountain air and soil, abundance of water, and a low cost of production. What we saw in MG Health were a management team with a clear vision to build a world-class facility in the remote mountains of Lesotho. A management team that invested their own capital and had been able to attract other investors, other noteworthy investors with long-term patient capital to bring this business to reality. As it stands today, the company has developed a 1,500 square meter world-class facility in the remote highland, in the remote mountains of Lesotho. We are capable of producing medicinal grade cannabis to any market in the world. We anticipate being one of 17 GMP accredited license holders, which is the good manufacturing practice or pharmaceutical grade accreditation that is considered the landmark for any operator in this space. What COVID has taught us is what it really means to be a business partner to a portfolio company, how to navigate the sudden erosion of investor appetite for riskier ventures. How do we reprioritize and reallocate capital almost daily to ensure that the company could survive these constraints that COVID and the related lockdowns caused across all of our markets. We look forward to continuing this journey with the management team at MG Health and taking both MG Health and brand Lesotho as a household name in the cannabis sector?
The COVID-19 pandemic has affected not only the way we do business as investment managers, but it has also had a significant impact on the way our portfolio companies operate. This has been especially true for the education portfolio managed by Old Mutual Alternative Investments. When the decision to close schools was announced almost a year ago to date, students, educators, parents, and everyone involved in running the country's education system was forced to adapt swiftly to a new way of teaching and learning. Our focus as fund managers has been on protecting investment value whilst ensuring the health and safety of our schools' learners and staff, and of course, maintaining the same high standard of education outcomes. Old Mutual Alternative Investments manages 2 impact funds in the independent education market: the Schools and Education Investment Impact Fund of South Africa, commonly known as CIFSA, and the Education Investment Impact Fund of South Africa, namely EduFund. Across both funds, we currently serve roughly 24,000 learners, 41 schools, and employ 1,400 permanent staff across the country. We started investing in South Africa's education system back in 2011 and have committed 1.5 billion rand to the sector to date. Innovative thinking has been critical in addressing the digital divide facing our school system. Since March, we've seen accelerated adoption of blended learning models in our portfolio schools. We invest predominantly in the affordable market, where barriers to the full implementation of a blended learning model exists. This has resulted in the need for our operators to be adaptable and innovative. For example, we as fund managers facilitated the creation of a knowledge sharing platform for school management teams to share information and learnings. This helped facilitate more efficient ways of adapting to changes, particularly for those school groups without blended learning strategies in place. This sharing of insights, tools, and best practice has proven invaluable in our efforts to enable students across our portfolio to continue to learn remotely. We have also seen some inspiring innovation from the learners themselves. One learner at Canaan College in Umlazi, Durban, designed, manufactured, and sold face masks in her community. In the first 2 months of lockdown, she managed to sell over 200 masks, demonstrating the school's teaching motto of see, think, innovate. Education plays an essential role in expanding learners' prospects and is key to rebuilding the economy. As economic activity slows and our uncertainties facing South African youth continue to grow, investment in high-quality, independent education, which places innovation at its core, is now more important than ever.
Morning all, I'm Sam Tennant. I'm an investment principal at Edge Growth and wanted to take you through our case study of Lula Loop. Edge invested in Lula towards the end of 2020 through our Vumela fund. And Lula Loop is an award-winning mobile technology platform that provides corporate and staff with a safe, reliable, and affordable commuter ride sharing solution. More recently, over the course of the last year, they also developed a software as a service solution that provides route optimization and allows for optimized bookings and management and reporting for corporates, as well as having developed a last mile package and document delivery solution for its customers. Lula experienced some significant challenges over the past year, primarily due to COVID-19, and were heavily impacted right at the onset in early April and May, immediately losing over 90% of their revenue from its corporate ride-sharing business. This meant that overnight, the leadership team had to quickly come up with a sort of effective solution to keep the business alive and save employees' jobs, particularly given the lack of trips that they were able to do due to the enforced lockdowns and essentially no one traveling to the office. The Lula management team acted quickly and clearly to communicate the new normal to the rest of the team through bold and transparent communication. This has been a real lesson to us in terms of effective communication and in rallying a team around a common cause, particularly for everyone's long-term benefit. The company looked how it could refine its business model through obsessively listening to and proactively engaging with its existing clients. And this led to Lula adding 2 additional offerings through its SaaS offering, as well as its last mile delivery service, and additionally became an essential service transport provider when public transport proved to be a super spreader. From an impact perspective, what the shift in quick communication from the management team and a sort of effective pivot to new business offerings led to a growth in over 120% in revenues for the period ending Feb 2021. Lula were able to grow their existing customers by over 50%, grew their last mile delivery offering by 40% CAGR since April, and have managed to save jobs within the company. For Edge Growth, it's been a unique opportunity for us as a fund manager to partner with Vumela and the Lula team. And it's been quite a unique journey over the last 9 months, particularly given sort of the investment was made amidst such uncertain times when many fund managers were cautious around deploying capital into new investments. It's been a pleasure to support Vumela and his team and partner with such a unique and innovative local business, one that we are certain will create significant local social impact as well as economic impact through job creation, reliable provision of transportation, as well as reduced carbon emissions. It's also been a valuable lesson for us as an early stage fund manager in effective execution and how startups can quickly pivot and build new revenue streams, as well as how important it is for brave and transparent leadership communication in uncertain times. And it's definitely something we will look to try replicate in future opportunities and investments we make.
We just saw the recordings of the case studies that we've selected to be featured this morning. But if you want to read more about all the case studies that were submitted, we've published the conference publication on our website under our resources page. You can also find the publication on the mobile app under the news section. But it's an honor for me today to actually have our presenters with me live on stage to answer some of the questions we had post them submitting their case studies. And just a reminder for who we have in the room today, we've got Andrew Johnstone, CEO of Climate Fund Managers, Kasief Isaacs, Head of Private Markets, Mergence Investment Partners, Kelly Joshua, Head of Education Investing at OMI, Sam Tennant, Principal, Vumela Fund and Edge Growth, and someone you didn't see in the pre-recording, but so glad he can join us today, is Vumela Mbwenu. He's co-founder and CEO of Lula. So welcome everyone, and maybe last, I'm going to pick on you first, but my question is, what interested you in the Lula transaction?
Hi, Tanya, and morning to my fellow panelists. Pleasure to be here. I think for us, the interest in Lula really started with Vumela and the Lula team, and we were drawn to his passion and desire to solve the real challenge we're seeing within our economy. With the lack of public investment in transportation and significant rises in urbanization over the past decade, as well as sort of rising carbon emissions through the number of vehicles that we have on our road, we just see this as sort of a massive challenge to the economy and to the lives of millions of South Africans. And we were really drawn to the solution that they'd put together. And it's, so for us, I think it was just to, the Lula team's vision and being able to provide a sort of cost-effective, safe and reliable environment for employees to get to work is something that we share in share in the belief that it shouldn't be a privilege. Everyone should be able and have the right to be able to get to work in a safe, reliable manner. And yeah, I think the combination of the energy of the team and the solution that they provided and the impact that was available through investing in this opportunity was something that really drew us.
Thanks, Sam. Vumela, so Sam told us what attracted them to Lula, but can you quickly just tell us how's Lula different to an Uber or other ride-hailing or ride-sharing?
Thanks, Tanya.
That comes to mind?
So that's a question we get asked a lot of times, and there's really 4 core differentials between us and Uber, Bolt, Taxify, the works. The first is that our rides are always shared with people you can trust, whether that's your colleagues, people in the space, maybe your school, whatever it may be. It's always a shared ride, which gives you a great benefit of reducing your CO2 footprint. The second is that we actually operate on a scheduled basis. So we create dynamic routes that pick you up from your front door, pick up your colleagues, and take you straight to work at a price point about 60 to 80% cheaper than your average ride-hailing service. The third component is probably the price stability as well. So our prices never surge, and they're really, really competitive on a per-person basis. And I think you can also add the fact that we are targeting companies and communities. So it's not a B2C play, it's just B2B and B2B2C. So everything is centered around the community you belong to. And that's the fundamental difference between us and conventional ride-hailing services. And probably to also add that our business is really about commuting as a core vertical for moving people from A to B.
Sam mentioned in the intro that there was a significant impact on your business because of the pandemic. How did they support you and your other investors through this pandemic?
Yeah, so I think we've been incredibly blessed to have investors from all over the world. France, Japan, the US, and some South African funds have all backed us. I think the key things that they provided is that some gave us a grant to run POCs on additional value propositions that we wanted to have. Some also provided warm introductions to potential customers who needed our solution. The others also provided critical frameworks to understand how you get through these pandemics. Stuff like reducing your burn rate, trying to prolong your runway for at least another 24 months. And I like to say that when I went to business school, there was never a course that said how to lead in a pandemic. So all the kind of insights they gave us really helped us be sober about the situation and focus on the main thing. And I think probably ironically is that whilst we were in the middle of a round, we had about 2 or 3 investors pull their term sheets. We actually raised the most money during the pandemic than we did prior to the pandemic, which I guess Sam would probably attest to the team's resilience to just keep on growing and innovating. So that's the core support that we received from our investors. And I guess probably most importantly is that we were all very honest with each other. I think it's one thing to sugarcoat things. It's another when you're honest about the situation with each other.
Oh, Sam, Vumela, that's fantastic. You spoke about business schools. I'm going to move over to Kelly into the education sector. But Kelly, Old Mutual operates 2 education impact funds, CIFSA and the Edu Fund. But why did Old Mutual decide to get involved in independent education sector?
Thank you, Tanya. Good morning to my fellow panelists. Lovely hearing about the interesting work that you guys are doing. So I think that we can all agree that education is one of the key pillars of economic development and nation building. At the time of CIFSA's launch, there were not many institutional investors in the education space, let alone the affordable education space, which was seen as quite a risky sector, which is CIFSA's focus. Given the context of the time, which was a growing economy, this is 2011, expanding middle class, that wanted more for their children compared to what they had access to, OMI saw the opportunity to build quality education facilities in the townships to actually service this demand. So therefore, I think the fund was really viewed as an opportunity to contribute to bridging the gap in our education system, whilst providing investors with an opportunity to achieve sort of risk-adjusted, inflation-beating returns. So being an impact fund, I think that you're well aware that we have a dual mandate where we measure our success against both a social metric and an impact metric. A financial metric, sorry. Our key metric on the impact side is the quality of education. And in 2020, the average grade 12 pass rate across our portfolio was 95% and a bachelor pass rate of 60%, compared to the national average of 76% and 36% respectively. So the fund has provided we're very proud of the 2020 pass rate, which was a difficult year. So the fund has provided that sort of social metric and impact. And then our returns as well in a difficult year had proven to be quite resilient. And I think since inception, we have inflation-beating returns. So it's quite a resilient sector. It's proven itself to be quite resilient in a difficult environment, which we're very excited about.
And I'm sure it couldn't have been easy to achieve those pass rates. I think there's a lot of hard work that needed to go in and adaptation and innovation that had to happen in 2020. But in your case study, you talked to OMI education team working closely with the school operators to explore new ways to adapt and innovate. Can you give us one such example of how you supported those operators to adapt and innovate?
So I think different schools had different issues, and they had to be looked at a case-by-case on a case-by-case basis. We have 41 schools in the portfolio currently, and across 20 sites. So it was really about deciding what were the critical elements that needed to be addressed in that school, in that area and community, etc. So being focused on the affordable segment, prior to lockdown, many of our schools had no blended learning strategy in place, mainly because of the barriers to entry, so to speak, which is the cost of data and access to devices. So I think one of the key things that the fund manager contributed or assisted is the facilitation of a knowledge sharing platform across management teams. Previously, our management teams didn't necessarily see it necessary to engage around because they've all got their own brands and they're all quite they all have their own philosophies, etc. But in this crisis, this knowledge sharing platform actually served as a way where management teams have access to sort of learnings at the time, which enabled faster adoption through a very difficult period. So given what is happening, I think the old way of operating was turned on its head. Innovation didn't only come through the use of technology. Innovation had to take place in all facets of the business to actually to ensure that the business, as the school business, actually survived. So our school capacity had to be reviewed, timetables had to be restructured, debt collection had become more nuanced than ever before, and budget constraints, budgets were in constant flux depending on what that monthly collections were. So during the lockdown and school closure, our monthly collections, some of our schools actually dropped to about 40%, but recovered quite dramatically as schools opened and sort of education continued and learning progressed, and parents felt comfortable that they were still getting a service for the school fee that they were expected to pay. So it was a very scary time, I think, for a lot of our operators, in a very uncertain time. But through a difficult year, I think it was also a good affirmation of the quality of our partners, and also, as I mentioned before, the resilience of the education sector.
That's fantastic. I want to move over to a completely different sector that's received a lot of attention recently. Kasief, the cannabis sector, your case study about MG Health in Lesotho. But besides for the fact that there's lots of discussion and controversy about cannabis itself, but what are some of the benefits that MG Health are delivering to the surrounding communities, if we think a bit about it from that perspective?
Yeah, I think my camera, yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Tanya, for the question. I think before I answer, a little bit of an announcement. MG Health has now received the EU GMP accreditation that I mentioned in the intro and in the write-up. So they're now one of 17 globally certified, thanks Vladi, excuse me, one of 17 globally certified flower producers in the world. So real meaningful milestone for the company and for Lesotho. Coming back to your question, so what we've seen in the community where the only form of income, only lifestyle was effectively sort of hand-to-mouth living and farming and no real economic activity. We now have a community of 250 full-time employed staff living in and around the actual project site. This is about 2 hours out of Maseru. So there was almost no infrastructure. The company had to bring in, do a deal with a mobile network operator to bring in Wi-Fi, with Postbank Lesotho to bring in an ATM. So there was literally no infrastructure. And what they've achieved is career paths for 250 employees. What they've achieved is bringing sort of basic nursing and healthcare facilities to a community where subsistence living was the only life available. What we're about to unlock now is dollar revenues, so hard currency revenues, euro and dollar revenues, things that were not on the radar in this industry as little as 5 years ago. So from an impact perspective, we're seeing that meaningful change in lives every day, every time we go to site, and we're seeing that conversion of that opportunity into real meaningful sort of positioning of the company and Lesotho as a global player in the space. We've lost Tanya. Yes. I think while she reconnects, I'll maybe expand on one or two other aspects of the opportunity. So just to give some more context to the GMP accreditation, what this entailed is the company built a 1,500 square meter facility 2 hours from the nearest city that is built to the equivalent of sort of a hospital theater. So that's the standards of cleanliness and governance and protocols that has to be enforced across the entire facility. We've got positive air chambers, interlocking pressure rooms between different parts of the workflow areas, and achieving that literally 2 hours from the nearest meaningful source of equipment. A lot of stuff had to come in from SA. And being able to continue during lockdown. I think Vumela mentioned resilience. That was a real landmark that we saw in all of our portfolio companies. The ability to persevere, to keep driving, keeping really focused. Vumela also mentioned being real and being honest and keeping very tight control of cash flow. So we saw it for that period, very much a business rescue operation. Right? We went into a mode that says every cent you spend needs to be accounted for, needs to be budgeted. We need to rethink our budgets, replan on a day-to-day basis, and sort of think of ourselves as a protracted 12, 18-month business rescue program rather than a normal operation. Tanya's back. So Tanya, I've managed to fill the airtime while you were gone. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks for that, Kasief. Really appreciate it. And that's the joys of running a virtual event. People come and go and signals come and go. I don't know if you answered my second question or if you even heard it, but I wanted to congratulate you on the grading and the accreditation. And I just wanted to find out, what does it really take to produce a product of that sort of pharmaceutical grade and to get that kind of accreditation?
I touched on some of those. So, for example, having to build medicinal grade facilities, some of it being to the standards of surgical theaters in this very remote location. Maybe the last one to touch on was also a significant amount of capital. So it was very important for us to have other investors of reference alongside us because we expected capital calls throughout this development and construction phase. And we were able to continue to support the company as well as other reference investors alongside us. But I covered a lot of that while you were offline.
Well, I was hopping in and out. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Andrew, I'm going to come to you. There's been a lot of talk about climate change the past few years, and it just seems to have ramped up the last 2 years. Why is it only really getting traction now?
Hi, Tanya. Can you hear me okay? I hope so. Figured out the technology.
Yes, I can.
Well, I think the 2 years has been evidenced by all sorts of change, but there are probably 4 or 5 key things that I think are relevant to climate. The first is we've seen the evidence. We've seen the evidence of climate change, and it's affecting all parts of the world in a more extreme manner. Forest fires in Australia, forest fires in California, droughts in Cape Town, droughts in Mumbai. You know, this is a global thing, and it's very evident. And it's being made evident not only by the continuous streaming of the digital world in which we live, but also the extremity. And that's probably the second point, is that the world is getting hotter. And when we talk about climate change, we're talking about a hotter environment, greenhouse gases. And the world is getting hotter on average. The average means that the highs and the lows are also getting more extreme. And so although the world is heating up at a, unfortunately, greater than the 2% target that we're trying to contain it to, the extremes are going at 5 to 10%. So a 2% average global increase probably means 15% of the Karoo. So we're seeing these extreme events, and we're living with the consequences of it. That's the first thing. The second thing is lockdown has shown us what actually a climate stable world could look like. We've seen wonderful images during lockdown of forestry, of animals, of pollution dissipating. So suddenly there's a bit of a wake-up call to think, actually, maybe we are actually causing this, and maybe our actions can actually reverse this trajectory we are all on. The third thing, I think, is the US. Can't underestimate the US. The US has been out of play from a climate perspective during the Trump era, and it's been replaced by protectionism, nationalism, and that's been massively, it's brought climate into a geopolitical space. With Biden, it's swung back again. So the US's role in the climate narrative can't be understated, and the pluses and the minuses have brought this sharply into focus. And I think the fourth and final thing is that this is a real risk. You know, what's happening out there costs money, and it costs lives. And this is coming onto the balance sheet of businesses. It's coming into legislation. It's coming into insurance matters. So no longer does it sit as an event which is sitting alongside of humanity and the real economy and the real assets. It's actually now integrated. So boards, investment committees, regulators are thinking about what does climate resilient investments mean? How do we dimension that? How do we monitor that? And how do we make sure that what we're investing in today does in fact have a climate resilience characteristic to it, so that the pensions that we're saving for in 30 years' time are in fact going to be invested in assets which are going to survive the inevitable consequences of climate change. I think the confluence of all those things is bringing to sharp relief that climate change is real, and that we've got to do something about it. And in fact, we are doing something about it.
No, that's definitely the case. But in terms of doing something about it, you mentioned blended finance to work. But what aspects need to be in place for blended finance to work as a potential instrument to invest into climate change?
So blended finance is a unique way of aggregating capital. It's sort of a variant of project finance for those finance experts and specialists out there. You get structured finance, which means sort of bringing money together in a certain configuration. Project finance takes that a step further and makes it risk. Blended finance is a derivation of that. And what blended finance seeks to do is to bring money from the public sector, from governments and from donors and development finance institutions, together with money from the commercial sector, and to combine it in a relatively sophisticated way, such that the sum of the parts enable that capital to take more risk and to be deployed at scale. So the definition that we like is that blended finance is the tactical use of public capital to deploy private capital at scale. So the operative words are public capital and private capital and scale. So the things that need to be in existence for it to work is you need public capital, you need donors, you need governments to actually participate in the architecture of it. And to do that, they need to be comfortable, and there has to be a high level of trust that inherent conflict of interest, which tends to happen across that profit margin between public and private, is actually transparent and is actually shared, and the benefits are not merely financial. As Kelly is saying, this is as much about financial returns as it is about societal, humanity, and impact returns. And so trust has to exist in large dollops to make blended finance work.
I think that trust is very important, and something that's come up time and time again in this conference since the release of the proposed Regulation 28 changes has been about trust, about the projects, about corruption. So there's a lot of conversation that has taken place there. But I quickly just, Andrew, before I move on, I wanted to ask you, your Climate Investor 2 focuses on water and oceans.
Yes.
Which I found interesting because our speaker this afternoon, Pippa, she was the director of the Netflix hit, My Octopus Teacher, that's also now been shortlisted for an Oscar. So she's made a lot of progress on the Sea Change project, but what is the investment mandate for this particular fund? And can you give us an example of an investment you would make into water or oceans?
Yeah, absolutely. So just picking up on your first question about the accelerated pace of change, we originally anticipated in Climate Fund Managers that we would raise a series of funds focused on different aspects of climate. We'd do renewable energy, we'd do water, we'd do landscapes, we'd do oceans, and we'd do cities. Because of the pace at which change is happening, at the pace at which money is flowing in that direction and the opportunity set, we've actually taken Fund 2 and Fund 4 and combined it into one, which is a water and oceans fund. So the mandate is actually very broad. It goes from catchment real assets, so dams, early stage water treatment, all the way through the use of water, being that clean water treatment, dirty water treatment, desalination, also into the marine environment through green harbors, green shipping, and marine ecosystems. So an example is, in fact, we've got a kelp farm. We're in the process of developing an 800-hectare kelp farm in Namibia. It's offshore. It sits in 50 meters of water, which is quite unique. And we are developing this, and because both its contribution to the revibrancy of the ocean and the ecosystem that attends that jurisdiction, but also it is actually a very good commercial asset. Kelp derives into a number of commercial products. It offers opportunity for sequestration, which we can attach carbon credits to, and many other aspects. So we do have kelp. We do have the more quintessential water assets. We are developing desalination plants in Thailand. We're developing non-revenue water, which is water leakage, water distribution systems in the Philippines. Our funds are global, both Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. We are doing municipal solid waste in Nigeria and Thailand. And you may ask, well, why solid waste? And the answer is because 50% of the content of municipal solid waste is in fact water. And that water leaches out of normal dump sites, goes into groundwater, and has a toxifying effect. So in that whole business cycle, there is actually an opportunity to generate revenue and also reuse water and treat water before it goes into water courses. So that gives you a sense of the things we're doing. It's very broad. It's also very nascent. You know, water is probably, from a development perspective, a decade behind where renewable energy is at the moment. So there's a lot of work to be done in getting projects packaged, get them shovel ready, to use the term at the moment, and get them into construction and get them to start delivering the benefit.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. In this last segment, I am going to ask the speakers about their lessons learned as we start wrapping up. Vulani, I'm going to start with you. Sam mentioned in the case that over 90% of your revenue was eroded when the crisis hit and lockdown started. What offerings did you come up with, or what alternatives did you come up with in your product line to deal with this revenue erosion?
Thanks, Tanya. So, yeah, I think that was a very interesting time. I mean, obviously it was scary because, you know, January, February, March, we were on this like upward trajectory of, customer acquisition, number of rides increasing. But I think the two core things that we did, the first was introducing a parcel delivery service for small businesses. So when lockdown had hit, a lot of companies on typical foot traffic to do, sell their products now needed a more cost-effective delivery solution, of which we had always had a vision that one day deliveries and passenger mobility would converge. So we thought, you could go onto takealot.com, order a parcel and click checkout with Lula, and then that parcel would be in the back of the van when it comes to pick you up from work. So we always had envisioned that. It just was a case that got accelerated during COVID. The second aspect was we introduced software as a service for existing transport agreements. So what you'll see is with call centers, they typically have to provide transportation to their employees, but that process of managing it is email, WhatsApp, back and forth, he said, she said, and it's costing companies a lot of time, money, and frustration. So we introduced the Lula platform to enable existing companies to benefit from that. And we're servicing 3 core sites in Cape Town, one of the largest call centers in South Africa with that. And so we're super excited that we were able to get that off the line. And we like to say, never let a good crisis go to waste. I think more than that, a good emphasis was that with public transit being a super spreader, there are a number of companies, or if I could call them conscious companies, that said, we're not going to let public transport, infect our staff or risk, employees coming on board and having COVID contacted through the public transport. So they started using Lula to pick their employees from home to work, and we were able to do contact tracing. So let's say the 6 of us are on a ride and Tanya starts developing symptoms, she can send a message in the Lula app, and then Lula will let Kelly, Andrew, Sam, and Kasief all know that Tanya was showing symptoms, so you can now isolate. And that was a really smart but novel way to keep the wheels on the ground still moving. So that's what we did during the pandemic.
Well, that's fantastic. And Sam, well done for investing in one of the entrepreneurs that showed, or teams that showed agility and innovation. But Sam, as an investor, what is Edge Growth going to do differently? Are you going to view transactions differently? What's going to change post the pandemic world for you?
Sure. I think there are a couple of things we learned along the journey. We do play in the early stage space and the startup space where things do change a lot. However, we weren't quite prepared for sort of COVID and how drastically things can change, literally overnight. And I think the 2 lessons we really learned from that was having honest, sober conversations up front. I think, we found in the startup space that there is a lot of change, and there's a lot of conversations around fail quick, and test your sort of thesis and move on to sort of new potential sort of, pivot offerings. However, from an execution basis, that doesn't often happen. And often it's due to a lack of frank conversations. And sometimes that is difficult where there is sort of an element of trust does need to be there to sort of founder those. But, we've really found that in being able to have, and probably forcibly so through COVID, having some sort of very frank conversations, you automatically sort of switch your lens. And, we very quickly realized as a fund manager that, it's something we always did know, but it really did test our belief in this, and that, being a fund manager is a lot more than just the capital. And it's all the additional value adds and leadership and lessons that you can kind of bring along the way. And it was something that we did appreciate prior to COVID, but it's really kind of, placed a new light onto how much we can sort of provide and assist our fellow portfolio companies, particularly in the early stages when things are sort of on a bit of the roller coaster ride.
Thanks, Sammy. And Kelly, from an education perspective, or just your education team, lessons learned, things that you'll do differently going forward as OMI?
Yeah, we're learning all the time, but I think a key takeaway from operating in the pandemic has been the change in thinking that it sparked in the use of technology to enhance teaching and learning. So last year, our operators were forced to immerse themselves in the space, which really accelerated exposure and adoption of technology. When previously there was really a bit of apprehension and skepticism around the value add of technology in education. It was maybe perceived by some operators as quite gimmicky. But now, now that they've actually thrown themselves into it and accelerated the exposure, it almost seems nonsensical to operate without it. It's almost as a step backwards. So I think going forward, key for all our partners would be a strategy around the use of technology, and for us to really consider incorporating it into the infrastructure required in the upfront designs of our schools. Yeah. Thank you.
So Andrew, there's a question that came through from Grant, but I think you can reach out to him directly, Grant Cornish-Bode, and he asked, are you getting any tangible return from carbon sequestration? So you can discuss that with him. Kasief, thank you so much for sharing. We have run out of time, but really, if anyone wants to read the case studies, please go and download the case study or the journal publication for the conference. It is available on our website under resources. It's also available in the app under news. I want to thank my panel for being here today. Thank you for really sharing your stories with us. It's great to see what can be done and that we don't let a crisis go to waste. Have a wonderful day further and keep up the great work.
Thanks, Tanya. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks, Eric.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.